and close. They're the next three headings. So contribution of the existing site. Now that you've sketched out the needs for the site, driven from the development plan, contribution of the existing site to those, please.
Yeah, well, in short, it's failing against policy expectations. It's a failing store. It's not performing the role as an international destination or a fit-for-purpose flagship or a brand flagship. Its footfall has fallen. Sales are down compared to other M&S stores. It's grossly inefficient to operate. It has high business rates, nearly £5 million a year. It can't meet customer expectations in the way that modern stores at Westfield do. And instead of acting as a brand flagship, the M&S position is actually damaging the brand. And I have to say I don't share that conclusion. I was putting myself in the shoes of an international visitor to London and seeing that this was M&S's brand flagship store, I would be hugely disappointed.
How important are reputational issues to the concept of brand nowadays?
Well, they're crucial. As I said, that what we're beginning to see is brand flagships that drive other forms of online sales, and so it's about the experience and the image of brand is fundamental, which is really why there is, certainly for M&S and other retailers, there's still a role for that brand flagship, but it has to be the right type of flagship. A second-rate store simply won't do.
Thank you. And again, outside of this application, outside of this decision, can we go to 4.25 of your Appendix 1, please?
Yeah.
And there's a reference to the Chairman's remark to the Department for Levelling Up. Come back to that second sentence. M&S cannot commit to run a failing store where the ongoing erosion of footfall at this end of Oxford Street and the International Centre and Centre Activity Zone is clearly documented and unlikely to change without significant investment in new generation of the retail stock. Is that a unusual or inappropriate or uncharacteristic position for a retailer to take?
No, it's a statement of fact. It's completely consistent with M&S's wider strategy, which is to refurbish stores where possible, build new stores where required, and close stores where they can't meet their requirements. So it's not, well, it's relevant to this inquiry because this is a case where the existing store is an active strategy for substantial investment in this site to create a new active store. So it's a location M&S is willing and able to commit to as a new flagship store. But if this application is not successful, what you refer to is a situation no different to any other Marks and Spencer store which is failing, which is that it would close, and that's the position that M&S have consistently said over a number of years. And closed stores is nothing unusual about this site. Well, the unusual issue is that there is an opportunity to secure a new flagship store. That's perhaps what's unusual.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that's in retail terms. Anything else to say about its contribution to the retail international centre functions that we looked at?
Yeah, it's just that in addition to failing M&S and failing some reputation of UK retailing and Oxford Street, it's a failure of policy, because the policy seeks to retain and secure flagship retailing, international brand flagship stores in this location, and losing that is a failure of policy.
We heard from a number of objectors to the effect that really it didn't really matter if Marks and Spencer stayed. If Marks and Spencer went, you could fill the stores with, said, more edgy, smaller, lean time uses that would be vital and vibrant. First, do you agree with that? Second, would that be consistent or inconsistent with policy?
Well, it would be inconsistent, but it's also, I think, somewhat naive. The reality is that even with M&S and 65,000 people a week visiting this location, the unit shops in near house are, American candy stores. So that's even with that footfall. I think the prognosis would be even worse without this proposal.
Why is that relevant at all to sustainability and zero carbon?
It's a failure of undermining the position of the West End as the top of the retail hierarchy, as the most sustainable location for high order retail and other agglomeration economies. It's a failure of the existing infrastructure, public transport infrastructure that is not being optimally used, and it's a failure of the opportunity that this site has, not just to sort of status quo and stagnation, but actually to revitalise Oxford Street in line with policy.
Thank you. Next is how's the site contributed to its CAS status?
Well, the potential is substantial. The Knight Frank report identifies high market demand for the need for quality and quantity of space and shortage of unconstrained sites. Knight Frank also referred to the limitation of other schemes and the limited pipeline of new high quality headquarter type office developments coming forward. So it's exceptionally connected. It's an obvious opportunity. Policy at every level supports it, but perhaps say the current contribution to the CAS as an office location is nil. The existing buildings are largely vacant or underused on upper floors. It's making no contribution to the objectives of the CAS for high quality new office floor space or attracting international headquarters to support a globally significant office market, or of course the added benefit that brings to vitality and viability, because thousands more people working in the area also reinforces the retail and the evening economy. So it's a virtuous circle or vicious circle, depending on the outcome of this case.
Thank you. Public realm contribution at present.
Well, again, the ambition we talked about is absolutely clear. Need to enhance public realm, more permeability, public spaces, improving the pedestrian and cycle access, optimising urban greening. Again, the existing situation is self-evident. It's poor quality. The site at the moment makes no meaningful contribution to public realm. The site's impermeable. It has dead frontages as a result of multiple cores and the unattractive colonnade. Narrow pavement, no meaningful planting. The service yard is, as I've described, is shocking. And overall, it detracts from the quality appearance of the site in the wider area when, again, it should be acting as a catalyst for the Oxford Street district regeneration.
And we looked earlier at the requirement for change, which was urgent and compelling, and also the requirement for transformation in Oxford Street. We'll look later on at where the opportunities for transformation truly are. The existing site, does that speak to the need for transformation? Is it consistent with transformation? Where are we on that?
I think the existing position we find ourselves in is unacceptable for both the site and for the wider area, and is in that sense unsustainable. It's unsustainable in policy terms against the social, economic and environmental objectives, the development plan and national policy framework. It fails to make the most effective use of the site and regeneration. And it's also, as we talked about, sadly, it's unsustainable for Marks and Spencer, because it's an unsustainable and untenable position for a store that's declining and not performing the role that's intended.
Thank you. And if you are looking to transform this part of Oxford Street, what are the other opportunities available to you?
Well, they're limited, and obviously reading the Oxford Street District framework talks about particular nodes, and this is an important node at the western end of Oxford Street, where there are quite limited opportunities, particularly because of conservation areas, listed buildings, the opportunity for any significant change. This is really in the western end of Oxford Street, the catalytic sort of critical block property that has the opportunity to reinforce and anchor the western end of Oxford Street, and also bridge the retail and CAZ functions with public realm and with greater permeability and linkages into the wider area, and particularly the areas to the north of Oxford Street. So it really is a once in a generation, I think, opportunity for this end of Oxford Street to achieve transformation.
Thank you. And I'd like to look with you, please. Next heading is the proposal, the applications potential contribution to meeting the needs for the site that we've identified through that policy analysis.
Well, I think painting a bleak picture of the existing unsustainable situation. I believe the scheme will deliver, talked about at some length, but I think it will deliver all of the policy objectives and aspirations for the CAS and the International Centre and for Oxford Street District and the role of this site within the Oxford Street District framework. And perhaps before talking about the specifics, I mean, it's worth just very briefly reminding ourselves that, firstly, it delivers the most effective use of this site. So that goes to the MPPF, it goes to the overall spatial strategy of the London Plan and the Westminster City Plan. So it accords with that central tenet of the spatial development strategy and sustainable development plan for London of optimising site capacity in accordance with D3. So I mean, that in itself carries substantial weight. The MPPF makes clear that it's a matter that does carry substantial weight. But I think perhaps to talk about the specifics of what this scheme delivers, I'll probably talk through the various headings. I mean, I think in retail, it delivers on the ambitions. It delivers a flagship retail store. The Nash Bond report in my appendices, it does highlight the challenges and paints the big picture, but it also points to the opportunities. And perhaps M&S is in a unique market position, as they highlight. It's really the only anchor store which is willing and able to commit to this development. So the provision of a new high-quality replacement flagship is in line with policy requirements. It's absolutely four-square in line with policy requirements, and it's critical to making the best retail use of the site and maintaining the vitality and viability of the centre of Oxford Street and the overall strategy for the International Centre. And there's no great surprise in my mind that it's supported by the new West End Company, by the Borden Estate, and obviously by Selfridges, who claims made about adverse effects of this proposal on Selfridges. It's no coincidence that Selfridges see the clear benefits of another anchor store and footfall and other attributes of this scheme. So,
sorry, why is that? Just while you're on that.
Well, because the east-west linkage, well, obviously taking away buildings that in the main detract from the appearance of Selfridges, particularly Neo House and Oxford Street Extension, the colonnades, the poor quality realm, the overall poor quality of Orchard Street, limited crossing opportunities, it's heavily trafficked, this is a catalyst for reducing traffic. But the east-west link feeds directly into creating a new quiet street, parallel to Oxford Street, that completes that northern end of Oxford Street and feeds directly into Selfridges. So I think there's environmental benefits, I think there's trading benefits of more footfall and synergy of trade, and Selfridges would demonstrably benefit from a high quality building and high quality public realm. And conversely, obviously, that Selfridges would not benefit from a declining, failing store and a deteriorating site, which is the alternative.
Thank you.
So, given the overarching national and strategic policies to support the international sector, I just attach substantial weight to that retail benefit that this scheme delivers fully on.
Thank you. Just pausing there.
If I may just pull up just one thing on your answer. I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear it in your words. You talk about the synergy of trade. Just explain that.
Yeah, well, obviously the benefit of retailers, of agglomeration of retailers, even competing retailers next to each other, is because there is it offers the opportunity for choice. Now, Selfridges is demonstrably a very high-end retailer. M&S is more sort of mid-range retailer. But there are synergies. They're not mutually exclusive shopper groups, and what all retailers want is footfall and retail attractions that keep shoppers in the area and give them a range of opportunities. And it might be that Selfridges would sell some products that M&S wouldn't, and vice versa. But there are synergies between them, and so retailers want to be close to successful retailers. They don't want to be close to failing retailers. Even if their customer base is not exactly identical. And you also see Primark on the other side of the road again, a different market position, but there will be synergy between those three attractors. And they collectively provide a reason for people to go to the Western End of Oxford Street, which arguably, Selfridges could probably still remain a successful store, but will be less successful if it's surrounded by failing stores and US candy stores.
Thank you, Leslie. Mr. Harris.
Yes, sir. And the Selfridges representation is CD 1112.
Yeah.
Which does.
No, I did read it.
Great. Very good. And one of the things that you get from the Nash Bond report, I suppose, to put the inspector's question and the answer in a concrete way, is that unusually for this Marks and Spencer, it's got a Marks and Spencer sells a lot of underwear. This store sells more underwear than other Marks and Spencer stores. Nash Bond take the boot. That's because of the synergy with Selfridges, where you might go and buy an expensive suit or a dress or whatever, and then next door for your underwear. Yeah, is that sort of synergy you're talking about in a concrete sense already in the end?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the same the synergy with you might buy sort of designer clothes. We might buy Primark basic T-shirts and the like. There are synergies. These are not exclusive.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So that's retail. And when we're looking at the role that the town centre, the international centre, is meant to play in the spatial strategy, how important is this concept of transformation that we've seen across the variety of development plan documents?
Well, it's critical. To say this is not status quo. This is not simply maintaining a successful location. It's a location that's in retail terms is running its feet, and the transformation is both environmental but also functional. It's transformation to arguably what was the heyday of department store retailing, and once upon a time, of course, Marks and Spencer Marble Arch performed that function. Once upon a time, it was a shining example as a flagship retailer that people from around the world would come and marvel at, but sadly not now.
Thank you. Contribution to office and CAS. I think we touched upon this, but summary, please.
Yeah, well, in summary, the proposal delivers a very significant quantum of space, around 45,000 square metres of high quality floor space, and it would meet a clearly defined quantitative, qualitative need, policy need, better quality accommodation, the sort of accommodation that would be attractive to large headquarter office functions, as well as other functions. Might Frank identify that strong demand and limited supply and mismatch for quality, large, high quality, sustainable, amenity rich space. These are all commercial realities, but they're also embedded in policy. And I think that meets a clearly defined policy need. This is an important policy objective for the CAS. And as a public benefit, again, I've attached substantial weight to it.
Thank you. Public realm?
Yeah, public realm, I mean, in the round, you can't really ignore the development itself. The proposed development is replacing what I certainly regard as three poor quality unused buildings, leaving aside any heritage attributes of Orchard House, with an efficient, high quality, sustainable building of what I regard as exemplary design. So the building itself, in my view, would enhance the street scene and the character of the area, and I've attached substantial weight to that. But also, this is by revisiting the site afresh, not looking at the constraints of the existing buildings. This proposal offers the opportunity to meet the policy requirements for improved public realm connectivity. It will deliver significant public realm improvements, wider, more attractive pavements, permeability, linkages, much more active frontage, high quality landscaped public spaces. And again, I would say that they would carry substantial weight and meet the aspirations of the Oxford Street District framework. And also, not forgetting, there are related to public realm transport enhancements, replacing the service area with a safe, enclosed servicing delivery. I think it's a substantial benefit, and also enhancing walking and cycling access and safety are important attributes all recognised by the GLA.
Thank you. What about the sustainability of the building itself?
Yeah, I mean, the proposal, and come on to talk about the specific criticisms that SAVE made, but the proposed building is a highly sustainable, efficient building. It meets the policy requirements, and instead of SAVE focus on carbon to exclusion of other matters and their theoretical alternatives, which we'll come to talk about. If you actually look at what policies SI2 and SI7 and the energy policies of the London Plan and the Westminster City Plan seek to do, they're not all about retrofit is better than new development. They're actually about making new, highly efficient buildings as efficient as energy saving, complying with circular economy principles. In other words, that they can be adapted and they're flexible and designed for long use. And contrary to the SAVE arguments, which are almost entirely negative about sustainability criteria, I mean, I would say that this delivers substantial sustainability benefits. And there are obviously wider aspects of the scheme which it also delivers: new tree planting, green roofs, urban greening factor, biodiversity net gain. So there's a range in the broader umbrella of sort of environmental benefits that this also delivers.
So your overall conclusion, please, your overall conclusion as to whether the proposed building, the building before the Secretary of State, is in overall terms consistent or inconsistent with the requirements for the site when derived from the development plan.
I think that the proposed development would deliver on every policy ambition for this area and this site, which is a bold claim, but actually looking at policies as we have in detail and what they seek to achieve, I think this ticks every box.
Yeah. Is there anybody doubting that overall assertion, subject to the issue that SAVE raised? Is anybody saying that this proposition as a application does not tick all of those requirements that we've looked at?
No, I think the SAVE case really stems from a desire to retain a Orchard House, which feeds through to a heritage and what they regard as a sustainability objection. Yeah. But properly understood, the policies don't support that position. And in a situation here where both the GLA and Westminster City Council, which are both authorities that take a very, very close interest in major development proposals like this, across the piece in terms of sustainability, heritage, and design, both parties also agree that this proposal accords with the development plan and read as a whole.
Thank you. Shall we just look at some of those, please? Because you need to pick up Mr. Sturgis's rebuttal. I mean, his main point. Sorry, I don't have the core document.
910.
Grateful. And it's page 6, sir. There are some pretty serious allegations being made in this document. I just want to put through you, if they may be in due course. Here's page 6.
Start with section 3, planning policy context.
It does, but right at the top, 211, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll straight in 211, 1 and 211, 2 for the minute. There's a suggestion that the GLA has reviewed the SAVE carbon report, we know is true, but has chosen, it's a deliberate choice, not to give practical effect to the GLA policies before referring back to Westminster City Council. So a deliberate choice to ignore its own policies, justified or not?
It's a pretty strong claim. It's not a claim I want to make. The GLA's custodian of this policy is writing the policies and the guidance in parallel with reviewing this proposal. Suggesting that it deliberately chose to ignore its own policies is extraordinary.
Westminster City Council also departed from its own low carbon retrofit and policies in favour of new build.
Yeah, and again, we deal with GLA and Westminster City Council all the time on major projects. These authorities are at the absolute forefront of the custodians of design, of low carbon, of heritage. To suggest that they would sort of ignore their own policies, I think is extraordinary. I think what this all points to, which I'm sure we'll come to talk about, is essentially that, I should say, they've misunderstood what the development plan policies are.
All right, let's go to the two maligned planning bodies who've got the responsibility of determining the application in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. You lead, let's not go to them all, let's just do stage 2 for the Mayor of London, CD 412, and CD 32, which is the report to committee. The inspectors go to and will have read these, so I just want to look at the high level position. Yeah, let's go with the GLA first, CD 412.
So covering letter and then the report.
412.
Yeah, it's the report, covering letter and the report.
So stage 2, sorry, I'm
Stage 2.
So I'm doing this slow down.
Don't worry.
Yep.
And we've got page 3, reasons for objection summarised, doesn't make sense to demolish, it's very high quality, 100 years, building, etc. Then we've got the GLA's conclusions in relation to land use principles. Paragraph 17, sir. As stated in the initial consultation. Now, we know the initial consultation was back in December 2019, and this is March 2022, when a whole lot of further information has been provided to GLA, as we'll see shortly. As stated in the initial consultation, December 2019, the office led redevelopment of the site, which is in the central activity zone, West End International Town Centre, and the West End Retail and Leisure Special Policy Area, is strongly supported.
Yeah.
So they took that view in pre-apps, December 2019. They've gone through the process, and this is now their stage 2, which comes after the Westminster Report to Committee. And we know that they reconsidered their position later, but all the way through, the office-led redevelopment has been strongly supported.
Yeah.
And the reasons why and the relationship to the development plan policies that we've looked at.
I think the reasons why are obvious. It clearly accords with all of those policies.
Thank you. 18, they deal with considering alternatives. We'll come back to those in the second part of the examination in chief. And then we go to CD 302, please. And there's a very useful summary, which I think we'll probably do for these purposes. So the detailed considerations start at tab 8, section 8. But having considered land use, timescape and design, residential dignity, circular economy, all sorts of other things, they summarise their position as follows.
Which page, please?
It's page. Oh, I don't think it's paginated. It's the first page of the document after the recommendation. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
Great. Site's been occupied by Marks and Spencer since the 30s and is one of their 2 department stores. The accommodation has severe operational limitations, and with the exception of Orchard House, the buildings on the site are unattractive. Agree or disagree?
I agree.
Commissioners, etc. The key issues for consideration are land use implications, townscape, public realms, sustainability credentials. The severe shortcomings of the existing accommodation are recognised. Redevelopment would provide significantly improved accommodation and facilitate commercial growth on the West End International frontage, which is welcomed. Again, consistent or inconsistent. Objections have been received from the loss of Orchard House. An application was made to add Orchard House to the statutory list. At this stage, it remained under consideration by, as the inspectors pointed out, DCMS. In officer's opinion, the loss of Orchard House is fully justified in design and heritage terms. The new building is considered to be well resolved. Visual interest is appropriate to its historical context. Significant improvements to public realm welcomed will transform the environment on both Granville Place on the western side of the site and Orchard Street to the east. The development is highly sustainable in accordance with the City Council's policies. Proposal includes significant urban greening, meaningful outdoor spaces, and maximise on-site renewable in line with the energy hierarchy. Landmark building, significant contribution towards economic growth, creation of jobs, and also supporting the sustainable recovery of Oxford Street as a leading retail destination. Now, bearing in mind those two sets of conclusions, we know that both authorities say the price of the development plan when read as a whole. What weight would you ask the inspector to give to the judgments of those authorities, who are the only bodies before this inquiry who've got a duty to consider the proposals holistically?
We have to attach very substantial weight to their conclusions, and obviously on the basis that it's self-evident, their conclusions are backed up by a very substantial and detailed and rigorous assessment of the proposals.
Thank you. And what weight would you give in the overall planning balance to that acceptance that the proposal meets the requirements for the site as we carefully identified them in an overlong part of the examination in chief?
Well, it's significant in the sense that the two things. I mean, one is they accord with the development plan and attract a statutory presumption in favour of approval. But secondly, you have to look at what the development plan is trying to achieve here and the importance of the transformation. This is not just another housing site that delivers a few new units. This is a transformational change. Okay, it's meeting policy objectives, but the benefits here, in contrast to the decline and the prognosis for this store in this area without this development, and the contrast to the transformational change that this will deliver, it to me massively reinforces the case. It is in accordance with the development plan, but those are also very, very powerful public benefits which this scheme will deliver.
No, we look at procedural matters later on, but bearing that in mind, is anyone saying to the inquiry that there is a refurbishment option that provides the same or similar benefits, meets the same or similar requirements for the site, that is viable and deliverable? Is anybody in the inquiry saying that exists?
No, not as far as I'm aware from reading the case. The case is put no higher than that there may be an implemented scheme that may be deliverable if everybody's willing to compromise, and which may deliver some benefits. It's probably I would say the high water mark of the case, as I understand it.
Thank you. And we know that on the very last day that evidence was to be exchanged between the parties, Mr. Sturgis produced what the learned friend is now calling the Sturgis option at the back end of his rebuttal. We can have a debate as to whether it's new evidence or rebuttal, probably sterile for now. But I want
You've had the
the
option to discuss and said you're not going to. So
What's
it's sterile.
it is sterile, so I think you're right. But we do.
I understand your point, but it
Yeah.
doesn't take me anywhere.
No. So let's look at the Sturgis option then, shall we? In terms of deliverability first, in terms of deliverability, you tell us you're involved in retail, you tell us you've been a surveyor involved in the office market, and we've got the evidence contained in your appendices.
Yeah.
Help us please with this deliverability.
Yeah, I think there is a clear body of evidence in the expert reports attached from that group. from Nash Bond, from Leslie Jones, and from Mike Frank relating to retail and office, as well as all the design evidence that Wilbur has given, and that there are numerous and fundamental constraints to the existing building. And the clear, consistent conclusion from those experts in the retail and the office market, based on the current and expected occupier demand, is that there would simply be no occupier demand for any quality retail or office occupier for any refurbishment scheme based on the fundamental constraints of the existing buildings. And furthermore, that even if any sort of refurbishment could be entertained, the rental levels achievable would simply not justify the cost of such a scheme. So in other words, it wouldn't happen, it wouldn't be fundable, it wouldn't be deliverable. And
Can I just be clear about that? You said there'd be no occupier demand from a quality occupier. So you're not saying that there would be no demand. What you are saying is that any demand that would be wouldn't justify the rent.
yes, I think so. It would be a rash statement to say that if you had space on this location, that nobody on any terms would want to take it.
I wanted to be clear that isn't what you were saying.
Obviously, because somebody could pay £2 a foot. But,
Yeah.
but the point is that nobody would embark on, particularly the cost and risk of investment in a refurbishment scheme
Right.
that would deliver no returns because it actually would deliver no material benefits over what's already there. In other words,
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's deal with it in this way. In terms of uses, is another use in addition to retail a pre-requirement for any deliverable scheme here?
Well, I think yes in two terms. I mean, one in policy terms, because it's making effective use of the site and meeting the CAS objectives that the City Council would expect an effective use of the upper floors, and offices would be preferred use. But secondly, again, the cost of a redevelopment scheme, and equally the cost of any sort of refurbishment scheme, requires delivery of additional value. And there's no point in embarking on a major refurbishment scheme that doesn't deliver additional value, and that means making more effective use of the upper levels that are largely vacant or underused at present. So that drives the commercial rationale for anyone to do anything, frankly.
Thank you. And if the office, we'll come to the retail in a minute and whether it does anything more than Mark Spencer's already got. If the office element is simply not deliverable, what does that mean for a refurbishment scheme that in part depends upon the delivery of office?
So it simply wouldn't happen. It wouldn't justify the cost, even if it was deliverable, and it's not.
Thank you very much. Now, the point taken against all the expert advice, etc., by Mr. Sturgis, who produced the document when he did, and my reason for identifying that is that, well, none of those experts have seen my analysis. So we've got their analysis carefully set out in your document. If you pick up Mr. Sturgis's rebuttal, please. He makes this point, which is fairness point, paragraph 1.5.
Yeah, sorry, paragraph
1.5. He makes 2 points. The first is that, well, none of those experts have seen my plans, like, no way. And he also suggests that those experts were only asked to consider a light touch refurbishment. Now, first of all, is that right? Were the experts only asked to consider a light touch refurbishment, or was it something different?
No, that's basically incorrect. It's clear from the terms of from the reports that each of them used that they've looked at all the potential options. They've looked at the fundamental potential commercial terms and design terms for any form of refurbishment of the existing space. And what they've each done is identify what they regard as the fundamental hurdles in the way of any effective commercially attractive refurbishment. And they identify a number of common themes, the shortcomings and restrictions imposed by the facade, by the column density, by the changes in levels, by the floor to ceiling, and in relation to office by the heat plan, and the absence of sort of self-contained identity for the office element, as being consistently and fundamentally obstacles to any form of refurbishment of this space to meet modern occupier requirements.
And they,
Sorry, if you don't mind, I hate to interrupt, but just like to be clear in your words, identify the office for office development. You talked about a way to identify.
Oh, sorry, yes, it's the idea of a front door. If you retain
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
So please explain.
Yeah, because if you just have the door in the existing unattractive facade or hidden away, as you'll be aware, so prime office developments require some sort of identity and a front door and an image. I'm not saying there isn't demand for sort of back of house and local sort of suburban offices tucked away, but if you're looking at the CAS objectives for prime high quality office space, sort of space that a HQ office would want, consistently they have that image. They're not sort of tucked away or buried above a shop. And you can't achieve that unless, again, you're doing rather more radical surgery, particularly in relation to the facades.
Thank you. And I think all the reports refer to that concept as an address.
Yeah.
Probably with a capital A, I don't know. I think that's what the inspector's getting at.
It is. I just wanted to hear the end.
Yeah. Thank you. So starting with you, you've had an opportunity now to look at the Sturgis options, and in terms of those inescapable constraints, which are referred to in the Stage 2 report and in the report to committee, severe shortcomings of the existing accommodation, operational limitations which are severe, etc. Are they remedied by Mr. Sturgis's what Learned now calls Mr. Sturgis option?
Well, no, I don't think they are, and I want to repeat the I thought very clear evidence that Mr. Bilbrough gave. But from my perspective, there's a couple of points I'd make. The first is it does now appear to be common ground that we're not talking about a facade retention scheme. Mr. Forshaw seemed to suggest that that could be a solution, and the arguments against a facade retention scheme, what he described as feeble. But it now seems that all parties agree that a simple facade retention is not a sensible option. I think that's now common ground. So what Mr. Sturgis has done is obviously rather dramatic surgery, using this terminology of cut and carve. As Mr. Bilbrough highlighted, he's taking away, Bilbrough estimated 27% of the space, losing all the peripheral cores, which obviously are one of the many constraints in the site, providing some additional space, but I question the logic of trying to achieve high quality prime grade A space perched on top of a fundamentally unattractive and commercially building below. That's again goes perhaps to the address, but it wouldn't appear to me to be a sound investment solution to build prime quality space perched on top of fundamentally compromised space, because the market demand is completely different. The limited uplift in space is without considering the further, in my view, dramatic surgery that will be required to achieve effective east-west and north-south permeability. The idea of sort of tunnel or sort of ground floor tunnel through the site, I think would just simply be grossly wholly unacceptable to the City Council and fail in design and commercial terms. But in order to achieve that, you'd have to take out more space. more of the existing structure. And then you've got the problems that Mr. Fulbrough highlighted, that if you try and incorporate the loading bay because of the need to convert the new structure to support the upper levels, the loading bay doesn't work. The facile retention is unacceptable in terms of pavement width, even with the road works. It would require retaining the unattractive undercroft and lack of active frontages. I talked about the tunnel, and we talked about the lack of opportunity for public realm, trees. It loses the basement, which is fundamental in commercial terms. But more to the point, the more you take away from this, you don't get to you don't address the root cause of the problem, which is that the more you take away, the more, in my view, less tangible any benefit in sustainability becomes. But you're still left with bricks, the floor ceiling height, and the constraints of the facade, which are the fundamental points where all the commercial advisors have highlighted why anything of refurbishment won't work. So all things that Mr. Forshaw has done is arguably helped to make the case that these buildings are not suitable because of the amount of surgery and cut and carve that's needed, even on his standards.
So are you referring to Mr. Porter or Mr. Sturgis?
Sorry, Mr. Sturgis. Sorry,
Just for my name.
yes, the more you take away, the less tangible any conceivable benefits become. But actually, you're not addressing the root cause of the problem, and that simply to me reinforces why the conclusion that we've all reached, based on commercial advice and design advice, that simply none of these are tenable options.
Thank you. That's your position. Can we now turn to Knight Frank and KKS Savills, please, which is your appendix 5. And the detail is there for the inspector to read. I want to look at the executive summary. At 2.7, they say, based on our in-depth assessment of the site, the reuse of existing premises cannot meet any of the needs that are required of a modern office. The issues are so fundamental in our view that any refurbishment of the existing building cannot address the main and inescapable structural issues.
So what's the paragraph?
207, so page 169 of the document. The issues are so fundamental in our view that any refurbishment of the existing building cannot address the main and inescapable structural issues of the building, which include but are not limited to its floor-to-ceiling height, column grid pattern, and its consequences, and the disjointed nature of the 3 floor plates and its resulting spaces. Now, since that was written, we've got the Sturgis option, and we've got Mr. Sturgis saying, but they hadn't seen mine. As a matter of fairness, have you asked these Knight Frank and KKS Savills to reconsider their position based on the Sturgis option in the rebuttal?
Yeah, I've asked their views, and unsurprisingly, I mean, what they've said to me is that this doesn't address the fundamentals. It's simply more cost, more carbon outlay for the same inherent problems that they identify: the columns, the facade, floor ceiling heights, the levels, and the deep floor plans, and the lack of redress. So it's just additional carbon, additional demolition for no benefit, and as a consequence, again, an undeliverable scheme.
Thank you. 2.8, in summary, for this site to be attractive to a West End commercial occupier and to meet the technical and spatial needs of any occupier, a redevelopment scheme is necessary. I think both parties accept that. Any variation involving refurbishment of the building and its inherent and inescapable constraints would not be delivered. Looking at the Sturgis option, do Knight Frank and KKS Savills now take a different view, having seen it?
No, I mean, again, it's clear that it wouldn't be delivered. It doesn't meet M&S's requirements, so it won't meet the requirements for a flagship anchor store. The inherent challenges, which have been clearly identified by all of the commercial advisors, would apply as much to the latest suggestion from Mr. Sturgis as any refurbishment store.
Is there any other market evidence of deliverability before the Inspector or the Secretary of State?
No.
Has Mr. Sturgis taken any market evidence as to deliverability as part of his option being placed before the inquiry when it was?
Not that I'm aware of. I've certainly seen evidence.
Very much. Can we turn to retail now, please? Retail. Your judgment first as a retail expert, then we come to Nash Bond as to whether the Sturgis option is deliverable or appropriate.
But again, I think it doesn't deliver because it doesn't address the fundamental constraints. I mean, if this was simply about M&S downsizing and occupying less of the existing space, they could do so, but that doesn't address the fundamentals and the fundamental problems, which are about the quality of the space, and also that it fundamentally depends on the viability of the rest of the use of the building. So there's nothing in the latest suggestions from Mr. Sturgis that suggests that this would work in retail terms. The same inherent problems would remain. They wouldn't meet M&S's requirements, and therefore status quo is that it would remain. Well, it wouldn't do it for the obvious reason. It doesn't move them forward. It leaves them with a continued failing store, having spent more money trying to stop it failing, which is why they wouldn't do it.
Just want to explore that a little, please, because much was made by a friend about threat, etc. Remember that? If the store is failing now, is anybody saying that Marks and Spencer are not entitled in the ordinary operation of business functions and looking after their shareholders? If the store is failing now, is anybody saying that Marks and Spencer's wouldn't be entitled to close it, as they've done in Sauchiehall Street, as they've done in Swansea, as they've done in Cambridge, just to protect the shareholders' position?
Well, I don't think so. I think that's a fair or rational stance to take. As you say, M&S are a business, and they make commercial decisions about which stores they keep, and they close stores that are not successful. The difference here is that this is a store that, in a location that can be successful with major investment and a new store. So unlike those that they've closed out of hand, this is an opportunity where they don't want to close the store. They want to invest in a new flagship store and deliver all the benefits that this scheme will deliver.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that second part later, but the first part, really, nothing to stop them leaving. And we look at 425 of their statement. They say in terms,
This is the M&S.
the M&S Appendix 1, so M&S cannot commit to run a failing store where the ongoing erosion of footfall at this end of Oxford Street in the International Centre and the Central Activity Zone is clearly documented and unlikely to change. So again, forget this application. If they're entitled to take that decision, and nobody seems to be complaining about that as a business, nobody's saying that the store is not failing. That's the evidence. The question for the inspector is, what does this option, the Sturgis option, what if anything does the Sturgis option alter that would change Marks and Spencer's rational business decision here?
Well, nothing, because it does nothing to deliver the transformational change that's required to achieve a viable flagship store in this location.
So how consistent or otherwise is what you've seen from Mr. Sturgis? Does it really change anything about the way the store would operate from Marks and Spencer's point of view?
No, as I say, all it does is point to more dramatic cut and carve, taking even more of the existing fabric away, but fundamentally not addressing the fundamental constraints of these three buildings as a retail building.
Thank you. And we've got the Nash Bond analysis of refurbishment, which is on Appendix 3. Section 10 for the summary.
Yeah.
Page 31, sir. Yeah, perfect. In summary, the outcome of the analysis of the existing buildings is clear. Their shortcomings are so significant they are simply not fit for the purpose to any modern retailer requirement. Perhaps the overriding structural shortcomings are the low inconsistent ceiling heights across both ground and basement floors, together with the high density of structural columns, also at both ground and basement levels. This is, in my view, one of the leading barriers to entry which will deter a feasible reletting of the existing buildings in whole or in part. So Nash Bond Rust look at the reletting at Marks and Spencer.
Yeah.
A refurbishment, even with change of use, might reduce the retail area significantly over 2 levels, whilst offering limited flexibility of subdivision. It cannot resolve the structural issues relating to the poor facade, inferior ceiling heights, or density of the structural grid. You agree or disagree as yourself, the retail expert?
No, I agree. That all those points are well made and obvious commercial considerations.
Thank you. Have Nash Bond now been asked to look at the option provided in the rebuttal?
I'm not sure. I have not spoken to them, so I couldn't say.
Please, in terms of Marks and Spencer's assessment of the Sturgis option, Marks and Spencer's assessment of the Sturgis option, does it put them in a place that they think they need to be at this location?
Well, no. It has to be said that M&S been on this journey since 2018, and right from the outset considering refurbishment. It would be surprising if Mr. Sturgis, in his rebuttal evidence, has come up with something that Marks and Spencer and their design team and all the expertise that's been brought there on this project had not actually been aware was something that could be done. It doesn't address any of the fundamental constraints to M&S. So there's nothing, really, to be frank, there's nothing in this Verticom's new option other than simply taking away even more of the existing structure in carbon, but leaving the same fundamental problems and constraints behind.
Thank you. Have SAFE taken any retail market expertise into account in producing this document?
Again, not that I'm aware.
All right, thank you. Can we deal with public realm, townscape and transformation, which we've seen are key elements of the requirements for the site set out in the documentation? How does Mr. Sturgis's scheme deliver those, or doesn't it?
Well, I mean, the fundamental point about delivery is the scheme has to be deliverable to deliver any benefits, and it's not. We then look at what, in a hypothetical sense, what constraints are. The facade itself imposes constraints, even if Orchard Street was reduced, in terms of the requirement to retain the colonnade, because otherwise it wouldn't meet TfL's requirements on pavement widths. So you can't address that colonnade and that blank frontage. That reduces the potential for active frontages. Public realm talked about the linkages. They would only really be achieved in an effective way by more dramatic removal of fabric to create an east-west and potentially a north-south link, which removes more space. So the main point, I think, is that it's not an option that is deliverable, and therefore none of these benefits would actually happen. What would happen is status quo that unfortunately this area will continue to decline, and the Marks and Spencer would, in due course, without any resolution, the problems would close.
Thank you. One of the key moves identified in the Sturgis option is the alleged ability to remove the colonnade. Moving forward, how achievable and deliverable is that, given other issues that the inspector's got to bear in mind?
Well, my understanding is that wouldn't be achievable, because even with the reduction in width of the carriageways of Orchard Street, that wouldn't allow sufficient pavement width to, I'm leaving aside the qualitative aspects of public realm, to actually be safe to deal with the footfall. So my understanding is that you would have to retain the colonnade, and therefore the public realm on Orchard Street would comprise of space within the colonnade as existing as compromised, and then some additional space out there.
The Westminster City Council refers to tens of thousands of extra footfall generated along Oxford Street as a result of real estate. Necessary. But say if you don't know, but what advice has TfL given Marks and Spencer's in relation to that part of the floodway and how it needs to operate in order to be safe.
I don't know the detail, but having read the design evidence and background documents, there are clearly considerable thought has been given by Mr. Bilbao to pinch points and dealing with the width of the public realm and the footpath at key points at the corner of Oxford Street and Orchard Street, and at the entrance point to the new link in Selfridge is the crossing point. The space has clearly been designed to provide significant capacity for footfall and high quality environment, none of which would be achievable if you retain the facades.
Thank you very much. So, sum up, please. We've got a proposal which meets the requirements for the site, which is before the Secretary of State, etc. The Sturgis option, which came when it did, does that alter the conclusions that you and others have reached in relation, including the local authorities, in relation to a refurbishment option and its potential in terms of the policies and material considerations?
No, I don't believe it does. I think the so-called alternative delivers none of the fundamental strategic policy objectives for the site or the public benefits. It wouldn't be delivered. As a consequence, M&S will remain in the current unsustainable, untenable position, and in due course would be expected to close. And this part of Oxford Street would continue to witness the economic and environmental decline. So, I think the outcome would be inherently unsustainable.
Thank you. Next heading, briefly, please, from a procedural and chronological point of view, want to deal with suggestions that, if you like, the GLA and the WCC didn't do their job. Yeah, very, very briefly, because the inspector's got the evidence before him. So if you think this is irrelevant to you, tell me and I'll move on.
I have doubts, but if you're going to go through it quickly, with it's 10 to 1, so
just to flag this, so we're going to be saying that these you determine on merit.
Just carry on.
Good. Can we pick up the NPPF, please? And can we look at what it says about decision making? And then we need to look a little at chronology. Page 13, sir. Decision making. And the very first subheading under decision making is pre-application engagement and front loading. That early engagement has significant potential to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the planning application system for all parties. Good quality pre-application discussion enables better coordination between public and private resources and improved outcomes for the community. So it's a good thing. 41, the more issues that can be resolved at the pre-application stage, including the need to deliver improvements for infrastructure, etc., the greater the benefits. For their role in the planning system to be effective and positive, statutory planning constituents will need to take the same early proactive approach and provide advice in a timely manner. This assists local planning authorities in issuing timely decisions, having to ensure that applicants do not experience unnecessary costs. So the NPPF's view about importance of pre-application engagement
is important. Very important.
Application in this case went in July 2021.
Yeah.
Before that, we know, as a matter of fact, it's contained in the various documents that we've seen a lot of the reports, there were at least 15 formal pre-apps with the GLA or WCC, and some were both.
Yeah.
And they started right the way back in April 2019 with the WCC, and December 2019 with the GLA. Help us, please. What's the nature of the engagement at those very earliest of pre-app discussions? What is it that are being discussed to take the project further forward?
Well, I think I caveat so by saying I wasn't involved in this process, and may or may not be clear from my evidence, but obviously I'm broadly been aware of the process of progress of this application as a proposal scheme for my firm. But we in the general sense, you certainly wouldn't expect anything different here. Is that right from the very outset, the issue of the redevelopment of the existing site and the key land uses will be the fundamental discussion. I mean, clearly, before you get into details of materiality and detailed design, the fundamentals would be this is a proposal involving redevelopment, or is it refurbishment, or is it recycling or extending, and what are the key uses.
Thank you. And we know, don't we, because we've got the stage 2 report, which refers back to that initial consultation, that from the very earliest, the steer given by the GLA was that the office-led redevelopment of the site was strongly supported.
Yes.
No, that's the pre-app. It doesn't bind anybody. That's the position that they took then. Then we know that the development plans were adopted in around spring 2021.
Yeah.
And we've looked at some of the policies. We've looked at D3. We've looked at what it says, and it requires regard to be had for circular economy.
Yeah.
Whether we need to revisit that. We ought, I think, probably to look at the other 2 policies which are alleged to be in scope and are. That's whole life carbon, which is page 342 of CD62. F, development proposals referable to the mayor should calculate.
Sorry, I was looking at the guidance.
We'll come to the guidance briefly.
The last point there, things that are referable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Development proposal referable to the mayor should calculate whole life carbon emissions from nationally recognised whole life cycle carbon assessments and demonstrate actions taken to reduce life cycle carbon emissions. So that's the requirement to calculate carbon emissions through a nationally recognised whole life cycle, demonstrate actions. That's the policy requirement. And then we go to SI 7. Referable applications, SI 7B. Circular economy statement should be submitted to demonstrate, and the things that policy requires it to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all set out. Now, a summary of this is the GLA themselves said there's nothing in any of those policies that outlaws or prohibits demolition in appropriate circumstances.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that assessment?
I think that's an inescapable fact. There's clearly nothing in our policy that says that.
Is there any reason to be expected to disagree with the GLA's own assessment of their own policies in the particular circumstances of this case?
No, I mean, it simply sustain the fact there's nothing in those policies that imposes that requirement.
All right, so let's bear in mind that the application was made in July 2021. These policies just came into play, and the pre-application discussions would have had all those in mind. Then there was a series of draft guidance notes issued in October 2020. Draft guidance notes. And we should look at the names of them, shouldn't we? Because the draft guidance notes are guidance notes for those who are preparing statements. So there's the whole life cycle carbon assessment guidance note. There's a circular economy statement note. They are guidance notes for those who are preparing those statements. to allow the GLA to use them as a tool to make a judgment?
Yeah.
Right. Good. Now, when it comes to, I mean, don't really need to say this, but when it comes to guidance notes, are they the same as policy?
Okay. I mean, they don't compile to guidance. They're guidance.
Thank you. Insofar as they exist, can they produce new policy? Should they be read as producing new policy?
No, they can't. They would be going beyond the scope of an SPD or an SPD for sort of introducing policy.
Right. Now, a whole raft of guidance notes was issued in October 2020.
Yeah.
By that stage, we know, taking this quickly, we know that there have been at least 7 pre-apps on the main principles of the proposal. At least 7 pre-apps on the main principles of the proposal by that stage.
Do you have that information or not?
Do not sure.
I'm not sure. I haven't got the detail.
No.
Unless it's in Pilbara's
It is, yeah, we can.
Just give me the reference.
I also, bear with me. Can I come back to you on that? Sorry?
Yeah, I mean, in your submission.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Even by the time of the draft guidance, there had been 7 pre-apps of the various authorities. Then the guidance came out in final form in March 2022.
Yeah.
And these are the documents that we've got before us. CD 630 and various other things. And that guidance in final form came out in March 22, by which stage all 15 pre-apps had been gone through. Now, as Mr. Sturgis points out, this document requires, for the first time, certain things to be done prior to the application going in. Is that possible if the application is already in?
It's not possible in the sense of a procedural, if there's a requirement for a certain document that you couldn't possibly know would be required. That's not possible. If the thrust of what is seeking, for example, the fundamental planning case for redevelopment of the site, is clearly going to have been relevant from the very outset. So it's a convoluted answer, but you might not be able to tick the box and say there is a report that ticks that particular box of that guidance, because that guidance didn't exist. But the process of what you're seeking to do is clearly done. It's no different just because there's not a report that says we've done this.
Perfect. So what needs to be done is for the GLA, having regard to their own policies, and insofar as they want to do guidance, to decide whether there's sufficient justification for demolition.
Yeah.
Right. So should we be looking for the process or the judgment?
Well, it's clearly his judgment, having concluded from as early as 2019 clear planning reasons, applying all of their policies, including their emerging whole life and circular economy policies, the judgment that there were clear planning reasons for redevelopment, which I believe there are. That's the judgment in principle, which won't change. I mean, what we're doing then is saying, well, there's now a new piece of guidance, but retrospectively, if we were applying that, it would have probably been a separate self-contained report that says this is documentary evidence that the judgment was really rich.
Thank you very much. And with that in mind, can we look at a decision tree? New one to me, but there is a decision tree which is said to be required pre-application of applications by those producing a circular economy statement.
Well,
It's in the CD 630.
Yeah, 11 time guidance.
Yeah. And it's at page 11, and it features in a number of circles in this case. First question, is there anything in this guidance or from the GLA to suggest that if you're, I think Ms. Allwood uses the term in flight, your application is already in, that you should stop and restart ignore all of the pre-apps that you've engaged in, etc.
Well, no, obviously, the policy is in constant state of flux, but not from a fundamental point where that's already been fully rehearsed and dealt with the point of principle. Because
You. Second point, let's look at the decision tree. I don't know if you've seen this decision tree before, sir.
I haven't, I'm not sure I've got the right document. Circular economy statement, is it?
It's circular economy statements. You're in this is the guidance.
CD 630.
That's it.
figure
Yeah.
4, so
Okay.
page 11.
Page 11. No, I haven't got that.
Ah,
I've got, no, I've got something
Did it
different.
look like that?
Yeah, it doesn't.
But see, it's
630 30.
630. Oh. No, so I think this has been remedied. I established about 3 or 4 weeks ago that the 630 in the original core document list was the wrong document.
Okay.
Everybody else, I think, has had theirs updated. But if you downloaded the
I-
original,
I probably did. This is an
Yeah.
Arabs.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I keep this odd. That's it. We can hand you a spare one. And
Okay. And
like
let me have
you
an
alluded to
electronic
that.
one in due course.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
sorry, sir.
Yeah, that's
I-
fine. And where does the Arabs statement go?
So the Arab statement should be in the 1 series. DD 01 something.
DD
1.21.
30 goes to 1.21. Okay. Thank you. Right.
Great, well, so if we look at this,
Yeah, got it.
it's decision tree for design approaches. And this is at the time of pre.
Yeah.
Is there an existing building on the site? Yes. Is it technically feasible to retain the building or in part? Yes. Is the existing building or parts of the building suited to the requirements for the site? A few things. First thing, in terms of guidance, is that part of the statutory development plan?
Yes.
No. Second, in terms of what we've looked at about having regard to circular economy as a material consideration, but if you like, not letting circular economy stymie the best use of the site, is the guidance consistent with that general approach or not?
Yes, I mean, this is one of a number of factors that you would apply when applying policy TD3. A whole range of factors, including obviously achieving growth, optimising use of the site. So this is not an overarching. This is a subsidiary. It's a piece of guidance, which is guidance to a subsidiary policy that fits within the overarching strategy.
Perfect, thank you. And it's a guidance to those drafting circular economy statements.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Clean in that light. Now, that is really helpful. Thank you very much. And I want to explore and explain to the inspector how the GLA examined their conclusions in relation to this and all other matters. We try and do it by way of one example. So, inspector says, let's do this quickly, and I agree. Can we pick up to that extent, please? CD4. Sorry, sir. It may be that once we finish this, we could have a break. I've got to deal very briefly with heritage. Okay, which we could probably do in 15 minutes after the lunch adjournment.
Okay.
I think we're still on target.
We'll see. We can always finish a bit later.
Okay. But pick up CD 47. This is one of a series of documents which the GLA now produce in relation to every one of these cases. These will become very, it is an Excel document, sir. And these will become very familiar to you over the years. So CD4 is the one dealing with circular economy. CD6 is the one dealing with energy, and CD 4.8 is the one dealing with whole life carbon. I was going to go through them all, so I don't need to. So I'm just going to. Okay. And the way it works is you get an Excel document which has got a series of headings, 1 to 10, with a lot for operational waste at 6. Then the GLA stage 1 comments, and then put it pejoratively, but there is then a series of badgering from the GLA until you answer their comments until they're satisfied. See that? So let's take number 1, for example, description of the development. Description of the development provided. Nothing further is required. Do you have that, sir?
I do.
And then let's look at strategic approach. We plan to summarise the strategic approach. That's the approach that we look like.
So it requires supporting narrative, the
Yeah,
narratives.
exactly. And then we provide that, and then nothing further is required.
Got it.
See that?
Yeah.
And then let's take recycling and waste. They kept asking and asking and asking, data request, and eventually table 7 is now updated, no further requests. And the additional information is welcome, nothing further is required in relation to lots of operational waste. And this is an exercise that the GLA go through on each of these cases, and with each of these statements that are required for circular economy, for waste, etc. Just consider, please, the position from the applicant's point of view. Let's take a strategic approach. The GLA asked. There has been 15 pre-app meetings with WCC and the GLA. The GLA has, in stage 1 and pre-app, explained their strong preference for redevelopment. We've got all of those reports. By the date of this document, the GLA are saying nothing further is required. Thank you very much in relation to strategic approach. What's the inspector to assume from that about the GLA's ability to discharge their function pursuant to the policies we've been looking at?
Well, the GLA has clearly discharged its function. There's a chronology here, which is that obviously its application came forward in parallel with these policies. But as I said, the fundamental principles were fully considered by the GLA from the outset. What they've simply done is, as the guidance has evolved and the requirements have evolved, and as this iterative process has continued, I think it's important to make the point that my experience of whole life carbon and data statements is that this is very much an iterative process. There are some in-principle decisions taken very early on, but also it's an iterative process that goes up post-planning and is an ongoing process. But clearly what's been done here is, as and when the GLA's requirements have evolved and changed and they've required satisfaction of points, albeit that they've been already satisfied in principle of those points, they've sought the further clarification in accordance with the latest version of the guidelines, and they've received it. And they're therefore happy they've fully discharged their requirement.
Now, just dealing with 2 points there. The first thing is that this GLA involvement continues pre-app, through the app, and post-development. Is that right?
Yeah.
And they're holistically in charge of all of that.
Yeah.
First point. Second point, can we go to CD 412, and then perhaps we can pause and go to very quickly heritage after lunch, subject to discussing that perspective. So we're looking at CD 412. We could do this with all of the paragraphs here. So 29 says at stage 1, further information is requested, etc. And all secured. 31, regarding the circular economy, this is the one where you look at the potential for refurbishment, etc. Additional information relating to the strategic approach, operational waste, bill of materials, recycling and waste reporting, and plans for implementation is requested. The information as requested has been provided. In addition, a commitment to post-completion reporting is included in the list of conditions attached to the planning permission. The application therefore accords with London Plan Policy SI7. Now, in the context of those pre-application meetings, the reports that we've seen, is there any evidence or suggestion there that the GLA is somehow falling down on its job?
Well, no, none at all.
Thank you. And then Mr. Sturgis sent a significantly multi-page document making the points that he's making at this inquiry to the GLA.
Yeah.
And almost uniquely, I think, will you tell me, have you ever come across a stage 2?
Do we need to know whether this
No.
is unique or not?
No, probably not. Can we look at the addendum? Where they've taken into account Mr. Sturgis's analysis.
Was the addendum?
It's CD 413, sir.
Thank you.
We don't need to look at Mr. Sturgis's evidence that was presented to the GLS in substantial form, the same as is produced here. Paragraph 12, GL officers accept that the retrofit and reuse of buildings can play an important role in meeting national and defined carbon targets. However, neither policy S12 nor policy S17 prohibits demolition. With the WLC assessments and circular economy, this is the guidance requiring priority consideration given to the retrofitting of buildings. GLA officers are satisfied if the applicant has given sufficient consideration to the retrofit and refit of the existing buildings. And in this instance, on balance, the buildings can be demolished. That's the position that's identified in 408. And no further evidence required, etc. Question: what more reasonably could the applicants have done in the face of that request from the GLA for further information, saying all information required has been provided?
No, well, I think this is an application that has been subject to a huge amount of scrutiny in every information request has been met by the applicant. I don't think they could have asked more. I don't think they needed any more to discharge their policy obligations. And if they'd asked, if they needed more, my experience with the GLA and WCC is that they would certainly have asked for it.
Thank you. So I've got heritage matters and overall balance to go. I think that would take 15 minutes.
Right. And you need to go through policy on heritage
No,
matters?
not at all. Go through policy.
Something different.
Well, yes, sir, something different.
Okay. Well, let's break for lunch now. Mr. Fraser, is this going to give this lengthy examination in chief going to give rise to many more questions in your cross-examination?
We're going to need to review over lunch. So
Okay, so we better take a full hour then for lunch to give you time to review that. Then we'll adjourn until 2:15. Fire is adjourned.